that was hell on earth. My first job at McDonald's, LAX, Southwest Terminal. So it's always crowded and crazy and hectic. Everybody was mean. It was nonstop. This is what it's like when you work for somebody. They get to boss you around and treat you like this. I was like, oh no, this ain't gonna work because I'm gonna get fired. When you're in that lifestyle of music, sports, concerts all the time, studios, it's not healthy. I'll be honest, it was drugs, sex, and rock and roll, right? It's just a whole lifestyle.
Of course, the glamour and the not so glamorous side of it. Yeah.
Every night, it's like, you're just burnt out. And I'm like, man, this isn't healthy. This isn't sustainable. I got a family. And I was like, you know what? If I'm gonna do it, I gotta just walk away.
I don't know if people say most of the wealthiest people, majority of them that I've met in my life are miserable. I'm pretty sure you may deal with the devil. I think success and what it means to really create a fulfilling life, to really see that people are really missing like... Welcome to Built for This podcast, Stories of a Maverick. I'm Jenna Bayuk, and this podcast is all about defining moments that separate those who quit from those who break through. In our podcast, we're going to dive into the grit, resilience, and mindset shifts that turn setbacks into success. If you've ever questioned whether you have it, what it takes, this is your proof, because success isn't luck, it's about perseverance. And if you're here, you're built for this. So I'm honored to welcome Kyle Cox today, entrepreneur, creative visionary, and founder of TCG Footwear and ThoroMan. Kyle's journey is one of reinvention, resilience, and a deep commitment to impact. From serving in the U.S. Navy to collaborating with top brands like the LA Clippers and Universal Music, has been defined by perseverance, creativity, and purpose. And today we get to unpack what made him built for this. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm excited to jump into it. So kind of like every good therapy session, we always start at the beginning of kind of how you grew up and sort of what early life was like for you. So I would love to kind of hear more about where you grew up, what family life was like, and sort of maybe if you had any kind of childhood moments that you can think back to that start to really shape that entrepreneurial spirit you have.
Yeah. I think sometimes I have moments of reflection and I'm thinking, wow, that I really kind of like you said, was built for this, what I'm doing, because all the skill sets that I've in my life, all my experiences have created, skill sets that I have and I'm using today. And in the moment you were like, oh, I'm doing this thing because of whatever reason you're doing it at the time. But it's almost like wax on, wax off, right? You don't realize that everything I'm doing has a purpose and it's leading to this thing, this ultimate thing, this culmination, this purpose. And I think that's kind of, how my life has gone so far. So I'm from Los Angeles and, we started off on the east side of LA in the area called Watts, which is, it's one of the most well-known, gang areas of LA back in the day, especially the 80s, still kind of is, but really back in the 80s during that era. My dad was finishing his school and training and whatnot, and my mom was finishing school. We lived in Watts off of 100th and Central. And then, once my parents, which again, it's funny because you hear about, Compton, Watts in these areas, and you just hear what, you think about it, what it is on TV. But, those memories, like, yeah, you saw that stuff, but those memories were really about the community. Everybody knew each other. It was, I was, at 3, 4, 5 years old, me and my brother would walk down the street to the corner store and go grab my parents, whatever they asked for. And everybody knew us and we would be by ourselves, and that was what they call it, the lock key kid era. And, where parents just kind of like, were a little bit hands off when it comes to that kind of stuff.
For sure.
Which is, I guess, why we're so hands-on as parents in our generation, right? They call us helicopters now, right? But it was just a different vibe, man. I just remember, again, literally right in the middle of everything that was going on in the 80s that you heard about LA. And it just wasn't that, for me. It was all the neighbors. Everybody's outside. We know everybody. They saw us walking down the street. We're waving our hands. So that sense of community was there. And I want to say that because when you hear that, you're thinking like it's going to be, some gangster hood story. And like, nah, man, it's 99% of the people in that community just work trying to get, and trying to really just make ends meet. And then you have the few bad apples that are the loudest. And that's what everybody thinks and hears and knows and kind of paints the whole area with one big brush. When my parents were finishing school, he eventually then moved us to the west side into an area called Ladera Heights, where I spent the rest of my childhood. And Ladera Heights it's the exact opposite of Watts. Watts is a Black community that's, low socioeconomic, and Ladera Heights is a Black community that's probably one of the most affluent in the country as far as Black neighborhoods go. And so I've seen both sides of that, and I lived both sides of that experience. But the common thread there too was community, right? Seeing everybody It was a community. It was a village. We were all friends. I can go to people's house without the kids even being there and have food and vice versa. And, and it's just
Yeah.
how it was. We could spend the night at each other's house. So that community was always ingrained, that need of a village, that want of a community was always ingrained in me at an early age. And then also watching my parents, I'm fortunate because a lot of kids in my community don't have both parents in the household with them. But to have both my parents accomplish their mission and push through and say, look, we're going to get our kids out of this neighborhood and we're going to do something better for them. I mean, I admire that to the highest level. Right. That is a story of resilience right there. My parents moved from the South. Everybody in my family's from the South. We're the only ones that really moved out to the outside of the South, and say, all right, from the South to LA, which is a total 180,
Yep.
to gang infested, crack infested 80s, west east side of LA, to complete school, to complete training, and do everything you had to do to get your family out of that situation. And he did. And from that point on, I was afforded pretty much every opportunity, never went without need as far as that goes, as far as your basic survival. But just watching my parents do that, you don't realize it when you're young, but as a parent myself, you value that and you see wow, that really was a sacrifice that, a lot of people don't get credit for, especially.
Do you feel when watching your parents kind of go through that, do you feel that, I should say, kind of you had the expectation that you had to be great because they had given up so much to offer
Oh
you a
yeah.
better life?
Yeah.
Or was it more kind of they allowed it to be inspirational versus kind of, we'll call it mandatory?
Well, I don't think it was never talked about. It just kind of was, right? It was just yeah, you're going to go to college, you're going to do these things, and that's just what it's going to be. It was never really talked about. It was never that pressure of you better do this or you have to do this. It was my nature. And I think, again, and as I progress, I think it was kind of, like I said, it was cultivated and through all of my experiences. Sports always played a big role in me. So I got into sports heavy. I was, played everything. Basketball was my favorite. And, I did everything I had to do with that. And I'm not tall. I'm average height and I'm 5'10", and go playing basketball when you're an average height person is not easy.
Yeah.
I probably would have been better off playing football is what everybody told me, but because you don't need to be tall in that. Right.
That's
and
right.
then it helps, but it's not necessary. But playing basketball and then playing in LA, which is probably the most competitive city for basketball in the world, especially during our era, it was, that is a level of resilience, right? So to even do that, you had to make those certain sacrifices in life to achieve and to accomplish that. So, you know what? I lied. The only thing my parents said you're going to do is you're going to get good grades. Like, we don't care anything else, but you're going to get good grades. So I always had that. I was always a good student, honor roll, everything, all that kind of stuff. And which again is another story of resilience in itself, to play sports at a high level and to do that. But the things we used to do for that was, there's guys who they're in the NBA or we're in the NBA now that we grew up playing with. And you're trying to compete with those guys. And there's definitely levels there. But me being the guy I am, like, you know what? I'm not going to that party. Me and my friends used to break into the local college gym and play basketball in the middle of the night. We figured out how to hack the lights and the rim so we can play in the middle of the night. And it's funny because the coach eventually caught us from the college. And but he said, it's cool, man. I love what y'all are doing. So, don't break my stuff though. Just come in, ask the guy, say you want to play now, and I'll let you guys in whenever you want. Stop breaking my shit. It's pretty much what he said. Because we would rig it, break it, it was a mess, man. We're just doing what kids do. So that, a big part of my life. And during those times, and honestly, probably the biggest lesson that I had, as it was in my entrepreneur journey, aside from my parents, and then obviously the lesson that you learn in sports, because sports is more about life than it is about the game. If you really have a good coach and a good environment, you're going to learn more about life and working hard and commitment and seeing the results of your work. But my first job, my freshman year, my dad's, you're going to get a job. And I was like, all right, and I was, underage, so I had to get a permit to get a job. I was like 15 or 14 or whatever. And my first job was at McDonald's in LAX at Southwest Terminal.
Yeah, clean as you go. Priority number one. Love McDonald's.
That was hell on earth.
Yep.
Hell on earth. My first job at McDonald's, LAX, Southwest Terminal. So it's always crowded and crazy and hectic. Everybody was mean. It was nonstop. And I made my mind up then. I said, there is no way I can work 9 to 5 like normally and just be, and have that be my life. I was like, this manager is an asshole. And this is what it's like when you work for somebody. They get to boss you around and treat you like this. I was like, oh no, this ain't gonna work. Cause I'm gonna get fired,
Yep.
cause I used to have like a temper, like, nah, that's not
Yep.
gonna work. But the McDonald's experience, that was the moment I said in my life, I was like, oh no, I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. And my dad kind of joked about it because we would come home like, man, this sucks, man. You know what? Why do I
Yep.
got to do this? I said, I bet you don't want to work for nobody now, do you? So because, and to go back to my family, my dad owned his own business. That's what he was doing. My grandfathers, I mean, they were entrepreneurs galore. Like the way they were they had multiple businesses or hustles on the side, from neighborhood barber to carpenter to, starting a cable company in Oklahoma to having their own practices, like to different things. Like they were entrepreneurs, both of my grandfathers and my dad. I was like, so I almost have, it's in me not to take orders from somebody and be, which is weird because I went to the military.
Yeah, that's what to say. That's like funny you talk about not working for somebody else and not letting
Yeah.
to get bossed around. I'm like, so how does US Navy come into play as you start to kind of get a little bit older, you graduate high school?
Well, I wanted to, I was already had my degree, I already had my MBA. I had a really good business with my first entrepreneurial business was called New Breed Entertainment, where we were managed, concert promoters, we were managing DJs and artists, and it was a whole thing we were doing in LA. And I mean, we had it going. I mean, the biggest concerts, breaking some of your favorite artists out here. And, we were the first ones they were doing shows with in LA, like Keisha Cole and Neo and, Dwelles. And we did concerts with Lil Wayne,
That's
E40,
awesome.
Too Short. We were doing shows with everybody back in the day. Bone Thugs and Harmony, SWV.
Ah.
I mean, I can go on and on about
I
everybody.
know, I'm already like, I want this concert already to happen again. I miss all those.
I wish we had social
place.
media back then, because a lot of that footage, we didn't have cloud storage and any of that. So I don't know where some of that footage is at this point. So now I'm just seeing like I'm lying about it, but you had to be there,
Yeah.
But that was my first entrepreneurial experience because I saw them and I said, all right, I'm gonna give it a try myself. But we were really hit hard by the economic crash in '08. And I felt very, very vulnerable. And I was like, you know what? I said, man, we still had things going. Like we were partners with the Clippers. We still partners with the radio station and all that stuff. And I said, man, I feel vulnerable and I feel like I'm beholden to, the government and geopolitics and whatever these other people that I can't control are doing. I said, I need to develop a skill set that is going to, that I could be kind of like bulletproof when it comes to,
That kind of sustains through economic
no matter
conditions,
what,
like a fallback plan. Yeah.
Exactly. No matter what. I said, I just feel vulnerable. Like, yeah, I'm having a great time and all these things. And I was like, you know what, Kyle? And then I saw where things were going. Like when you're in that lifestyle of music, sports, concerts all the time and in studios,
Yeah.
it's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's a lot of, I'll be honest, it was drug, sex, and rock and roll, right? It's
Of course. The glamour and the not so glamorous side of it.
And it's every night and it's like, you're just burnt out. And I'm like, man, this isn't healthy. This isn't sustainable. I got a family. And, but I was like, you know what? I need to just, if I'm gonna do it, I gotta just walk away. And I don't want to go back to school and get more debt. And my brother, who was already in the Army, said, hey, man, all you got to do is, go do one contract in the military. And he said, you can learn these skills and you get paid while you do it and you can go to college for free. And then I found out all the other benefits that I get too. And I'm like, oh, like I could just do one contract and I would make a career out of this to get that. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what? I want to get into tech. I want to learn technology. And so I went to the Navy and I said, look, I'm not coming in because I could have been an officer at a high level and did all these things because I had my MBA. I could have did all these things. And I was like, A, I want you to pay my loans back from school. And B, I'm not going unless I learn technology. So they were like, okay. So they eventually said, oh, well, if you want your loans paid, you can't be an officer. You got to go enlisted. So I went enlisted, which is, if you understand the rungs of it, it's like being an officer is like, creme de la creme, and being enlisted is like they treat you like a prisoner almost.
Yeah, you're bottom of the totem pole. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was in my command, I probably was the one with the most education and experience in life, than most of these other people, even the people who were ranked higher than me, which worked in my favor because they knew like, all right, he's not one of these kids out here that's 18-year-old going to be acting a fool. We can kind of
Right.
leave him alone, let him do what he do. He's always on time and he's always doing, he's never in trouble. Like, let that guy do what he does pretty much. And that's kind of how it was for the most part. A few assholes here and there, but for the most part, the higher ups, like they kind of like, all right, yeah, this is a different situation. So they allowed me to kind of operate as such. But so I said, let me do that. So I went in as to the Navy as a satellite specialist in in electronics. And so I'm a full-time journey. I've got trained in apprenticeship and electrician. As an electrician, if I ever want to just start being an electrician one day, I'm a licensed electrician. I learned how to code and program, and then from there is kind of how, and it's a good segue because from there is where I met my business partner Nick and we developed one of my first mobile apps called Boyle World, which was we developed that together. We won all kind of awards at CES for it. It was really taking off. It was really doing really well. And we noticed that the app wasn't so much the thing, but the content was our thing. And so when I went to the Navy, I sold off everything with New Breed and kind of, let everybody, let things go and put people in touch with each other so things can still happen without me. And then I kind of then I did my time in the military and I developed those skills. And then we developed the mobile apps and I got into the technology side of things and became really, knowledgeable in that space. And we noticed that the content with Boyle World is kind of what was really sticking. So we turned it more into a content platform instead of a platform that connected people to play basketball all over the world. And that content really took off, partnerships with ESPN, different shoe brands. And that's when the idea came to us with, we're like, hey, my other partner that came on with this is Rob Purvey, who was, he was he's a shoe dog. He's made Kobe shoes. He's made Shaquille O'Neal shoes, Allen Iverson shoes. He was the president of And1 Basketball at Hoka. He was advanced. So he was the man, right? But he was the president of And1 Basketball and he liked what we're doing in Boyle World. So he became a partner with Nick and I in Boyle World as well.
Okay.
And we're sitting here doing this content and we're really promoting these other brands and getting sponsorships and we're making, partner with ESPN and we're having NBA players and influencers. It's really popping, man.
Yeah.
And we're like, yo, why are we promoting all these other brands? We don't have our own. We always talked about it. Like, let's have our own brand. Like, we always wanted to get to that point. I was like, we have a platform. We can kind of do our own thing now. I said, but we didn't want to do sports. We didn't want to go into, performance footwear because now you're competing with Nike and all these big dogs who spend $3 billion a year on shoes. And
for sure.
And I'm
have
like,
the
man,
R&D
that's
departments redoing everything, customizing, big money.
Exactly. And how did they got all the NBA players sold up, right? And I'm like, you know what? Let's do let's do lifestyle. Let's do a lifestyle brand that can be worn off the court because in sports now, what guys wear off the court is almost as popular as what they wear on the court. They treat these dudes like it's a fashion show every game, right?
Yes.
And so that's how TCG came around, Thoroughly Crafted Goods. Let's have our own brand. We got that together, brought in my dad on that. He wanted to be a part of that as well to, make it a family thing. And then a legacy thing as well. Then, I hope we could build it up to where it's something that the boys can do, the cousins can do. Everybody can work together on this with this thing. It could be kind of our family thing. And we named the brand Thoroughly Crafted Goods because we have the abilities and we've done it to make more than just shoes.
Right.
Like shoes is fun and that's kind of our passion because we're both sneakerheads growing up.
Yep.
And but we can literally make anything. That's why we said let's keep it as goods. So that way if we do want to branch out, when we do branch out in a more lifestyle, a la Ralph Lauren, how, he started off making ties and now he's shirts and shower curtains and robes and bread spreads, and he's a whole lifestyle, right? And shoes and socks. We want to get to that point. We want to make it so that way we can, branch out and make whatever we want. And that's how we came into Thoroughly Crafted Goods. So, and I get to this point that all those things I said, from New Breed, which was management, music, content creation, promotion, event production, into the, military where it was discipline, structure, hierarchy, all these different things, to McDonald's where it was like, chaos and management, stress, high stress environment, also high stress environment in the military. to tech space, to where I learned tech, to where, we build something technical. Oh, we really get into content, influencers, celebrities, social media. You start learning all these different skill
Yeah.
sets along the way. And two side businesses I had while I was doing all this stuff, like on the side in between, was I
Yeah.
had 2 restaurants. I forgot to say. I
Okay. Yeah. Just a
almost forget
couple
about that.
things going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a couple restaurants where, they were all live music venues. So that's where New Breed, I would put my own artists on there, my own DJs, have my own events. I've totally forgot it. I forget about these things sometimes. Because I got tired of making money for everyone else, I was like, man, this is just how my mind works. I was like, let's have our own thing. I want total vertical integration. I want to have ownership over every step of this process. And so we had our own restaurant, which was BB King's Los Angeles. We had the BB King's Blues Club in LA, which
Okay.
was at Universal City Walk. So all the
Yep.
artists, performers we would have come up there. I mean, I was Nipsey Hussle before he was anybody, Kendrick Lamar before he was anybody, Tiger before he
Love.
was anybody. All these guys performing on our stage, and they're just young guys trying to rap, or all
Yeah.
these different R&B singers. That was management, that was event production, that was even food and all that kind of stuff. I learned all these skills to where we are now with Thoroughly Crafted Goods, where, okay, and now I'm learning product development and everything, and all those skills to build those businesses, the event promotion, the raising money, the technology and building out websites and apps and all these different things. It has all come into play here with Thoroughly Crafted Goods.
Yeah.
And when we started that, we were booming. When I say booming, I mean booming. We're doing over $1 million in revenue our first couple of years, and then COVID hit. Boom. That put a break on
Yeah.
everything. I mean, stop me if I'm talking, because I'm just kind of
No,
going,
I
but
was going to pause you just to kind of loop back
yeah.
because what I think is really interesting and what I always end up talking to entrepreneurs or clients I work with, I think it's a funny thing to always, when you get, when you're a kid, you're always told, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And everybody wants you to be one thing. You need to pick that one thing and then you just need to do it. And I've always come from a place in just hearing you talk is I totally rate of like curiosity. I love to learn. And then like, what's the next challenge? And like, how do I do this differently? And I think that we forget that we're really multidimensional and you don't have to be one thing. And I say all the time, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Like it's always changing and you never know what life's going to bring you. And you're going to expand that skill set in some way. And so through all those things, before we kind of get into sort of the main meat and potatoes of where you're at now and what you're doing is, I'm curious about kind of moments. You mentioned vulnerability before going into the Navy and like feeling vulnerable. I'm curious to know what that was happening, actually, what that feeling was like for you. Because generally speaking, particularly my experience, male entrepreneurs, don't love being super vulnerable. And even though that's probably the best gift that they can give their family, their teams when things are going on, going through clients, especially before COVID, during COVID, layoffs, all those kind of things, rather than trying to kind of be tough and not actually talk about how difficult it is to make some of those really awful decisions you have to do as an entrepreneur. Sort of what were kind of those really tough moments where I guess an easier option would have just been to either lean into party mode and do all the drugs and alcohol and live rock star life till you burnt out, but you're like, I had a great time doing it. Now I'm at rock bottom. Now what? Versus being like, I need to get out. And then kind of, switching through all those jobs, like what do you think between the vulnerability or maybe the values perhaps that came up for you that nudged you that you listened to make you make a different decision?
I agree. When I'm the kids I mentor, I tell them, like, look, guys, you got to be flexible, because I mean, not only in your own personal tastes and your own interests, I mean, we evolve over time. If you're not evolving, if you're the same person, if I was the same person I was at 20, then I failed at life. You know what I mean? And so your interests change, your requirements change, what you're willing to deal with changes. All these things change, even when it comes to your personal relationships. Like, you evolve there too. And sometimes the person you're with, you thought was your partner, it may not be that person anymore, because you evolve in your friends. So where I felt vulnerable was when the crash hit. I'm like, wow, we were relying, obviously you knew this, but it doesn't hit until you don't get it anymore. But like, we were
Yeah.
relying on total discretionary income. So once discretionary income was gone, people stopped showing up, people stopped spending money, you know, the first thing to go in a lot of these businesses, like, all right, we're going to cut the marketing department, we're going to cut that budget.
Yep.
And with New Breed and stuff, I was a part of that budget. If I'm partnering with your label or your radio station or whatever,
Yeah.
you're using me as a marketing tool for all your artists and your people and your events. And that was the first thing to get cut. And then even that we had BB King's during that time, and I saw Universal just out the blue was like, hey, we're going to raise your rent and lock you into a lease. And we're like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And so basically what happened is, people stopped coming to Universal Studios and they were looking at us to kind of pick up the weight or carry the weight, as far as what they were losing. So you guys were going to charge all of our vendors more, all of our tenants more, and make our money up there, because people during that time frame, it was bad. If people remember, they weren't going out, they weren't spending money. And I was like, man, I'm just sitting here vulnerable and I'm dependent on everybody else to to make money. And then I didn't like that feeling. So I said, I need to take more control. I need to really, grab this bull by the horns and really just make it to where, all right, I'm controlling my own destiny and fate at this time. And I just felt like I wasn't doing that. Granted, there's a lot of things you can't control in life, but I'm okay with those. But when it's things that I know I can, if I just shifted my focus and my expectations or my skill sets, or just shifted my mindset a little differently, I could change that entire situation for myself. It was recognizing that. And it was hard because your ego, like I built this thing up, like I'm the man in this space over here. People knew Kyle has a Kraken over here, and he got all these, he's got the artists, the girls, the spots, the concerts, like it's what I had. And that was my ego. I really had to say, you know what, let me stop. And if I'm going to do this, I got to do it now, So it really forced me. That vulnerability was, like you said, it was the best thing to happen to me, because I literally would not be here right now if I didn't say, all right, here's a fork, Kyle. Do you want to keep doing this? And excuse my language. Do you want to be, I felt like, even though I wasn't, but I feel like a bitch. Like I can't, in the most respectful way I could use that word, but
Yeah.
it was more like I just had no control. And I feel like I'm not going to sit here and be beholden to these people in Washington, these a-holes in New York, on Wall Street. I'm not going to be beholden to their crimes and their egos and their nonsense, the way it really impacts me. Granted, being a citizen, it will always impact you,
Of
but you
course.
can mitigate it. You can mitigate it as much as possible by some of the choices you make and being flexible and not so stubborn about, certain
Yeah.
situations.
One, I think it's redefining success, right? I think because now social media is so prevalent, there's a core group of people that get highlighted as this is what it means to be successful. This is what your Instagram looks like. These are all the procedures you're getting. These are all the toys you have around you. This is, the criteria you have to meet in order to have a valid partner. And I think that, I don't know if you feel, Tim, most of the wealthiest people, majority of them that I've met in my life are miserable. When I talk about like big, like scary power, influence, money, you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure you made, the lecture a deal with the devil. And like, this is what it must feel like when you kind of let go of everything of who you are. And I think success and what it means to really create a fulfilling life is
Yeah.
not all those things. And I think you throughout your life kind of hit that point where you get a taste of it. Sometimes you get to hang out in that space a little longer to really see that people are really missing like passion and like
Yeah.
purpose anymore. And it is
Yes.
just about like, I just want that money. And they keep
Yeah.
pining after all those things to get it. And then they sit there in their big house with all their cars and they're alone.
And nobody's around. Yeah. And then you have all this money. What do I do with it? I get that. I get asked that a
Yeah.
lot by, some of my wealthiest friends. They're like, what? I don't know what to do with this. Like, how do I help? I want to do something different. Like, I've earned all this.
Yep.
Now what? I can literally buy whatever I want and go wherever I want. Okay.
Yeah.
Now what? And again, money's great. Like, who doesn't love money, because it's a great tool. But if that's your passion and your purpose is just financial gain, I'm not judging that. But the problem is with that is that it can lend itself to making desperate and bad choices and unhealthy choices. Like if money's your motivator, I totally get that. I'm not mad at that part. It's just the fact that sometimes when it becomes too much of the motivator, I'm a guy of balance. If you do anything in excess, right? If it's off, if it's not really kind of balanced, it can be detrimental. If you drink too much water, they call it, I forgot what they called it, but too much water in your body like is a bad thing. And we all know we should drink water every day, but too much water, I forgot what they called it. I remember I was like, wow, that's crazy. Because, that people say a gallon a day, but then your doctor's like, yeah, just go when you're thirsty. Your body will tell you, drink when you're thirsty, and, your body will tell you, just listen to it. You don't have to make it this crazy thing, because that could lead to kidney issues or something. They said. But that's just an example of how like something that we know is wholeheartedly good in excess can be damaging sometimes for certain people, right? And I think money's the same way. And I teach my kids as mentors as entrepreneur. I'll tell them there's three things that we're really four. There's four things that you kind of have to really understand if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, right? You hit on two of them already, where it's your purpose, and your passion, right? Those are kind of hand in hand.
Yep.
Because that's kind of the battery in your back, right? That's what's going to get you up every morning as an entrepreneur to deal with the BS you're about to deal with today. Because you could have $10 in your account one day and have $100,000 in your account the next day, and then a week later you got $10 again. You know what I mean? That's the life of an entrepreneur.
High highs, low lows. You just kind of ride the roller coaster.
Right. It's the roller coaster.
Yeah.
The highs are some of the best feelings you'll ever have in life.
Yeah.
And the lows are borderline depression. I mean, it's depression, right? Sometimes, especially if you don't have the right people around you.
For sure.
And so I said, but that passion, that purpose, that's the battery in your back that says, I'm going to do it, right?
Yeah.
You know, whether your purpose is your kids, whether your purpose is community service, whether your purpose is, you know, for my family, whatever the case may be, whatever it is. It could be money. It could be inventing this thing that changes the world. Your passions, my passion is music or art or whatever the case, you know, whatever it is, giving back, philanthropy. And then the third thing that I say is perseverance. It goes with what you said, resilience. I was like, perseverance, because like you just said, the roller coaster of emotions, you're going to have so many setbacks. You're going to want to quit daily. There's going to be a moment almost every day where you're like, why am I doing this? I can go make a nice job, benefits. What am I doing? Like, why am I making this hard on myself? And then something great happens. You're like, oh, that's why I'm doing it. Let's go, you know? But you have to be able to persevere through it. And then the fourth thing is sacrifice. What are you willing to sacrifice? And like you said, sometimes people sacrifice their quote unquote soul, where your dignity, your pride, and we see a lot of that on social media, unfortunately. That's how you get popular on social media, is lack dignity, lack pride, lack character, and you'll probably go viral, right?
Yep.
Or have a ton of money and flaunt it, right? And really use it and empower it. That's how you get going on social media. So those things I tell the kids, but what is it going to be? Sometimes it's your health. Like I've gained weight trying to build, you know, ThoroMan and because I don't have the time or the energy sometimes to work out as I should, or I'm going to lunch meetings and I need to eat fast and quick so I get something bad, you know, and I'm gaining weight that I don't need to gain. But you know, you're going to sacrifice, you know, sometimes my friends, I would even say my marriage has suffered because of my entrepreneurial spirit, right? And so sacrifice, passion, perseverance, and purpose are really, you have to really tap into those if you're going to go down this road. You know, Nipsey Hussle had a good line where he said, and this is kind of how I feel about it, like all those times when I'm ready to quit and you go through the range of emotions, he's like, look, man, he said, I'm so far in the middle of the ocean that it's closer to my destination, that island right there, than it is to go back on the shore. So I might as well keep going. You know, so, and that's kind of my mindset. I'm like, dude, you put in all this work, you made all this money, you've done all these, you've got all these relationships, you've built this kind of reputation for yourself. So walk away from it right now. You've done all that work. It'll be like you just throwing it away. And so instead of walking away from it, I kind of found a through line in all of this stuff and everything I'm doing. What's the through line, which still always goes back to my initial purpose and passion, which was always, you know, I wanted to really get into public policy and community service. That was really kind of like always my passion in everything I did. Like, hey, let's do this music entertainment stuff, you know, and really make it and create this community where we can go back and give back. And it's you see somebody like Kendrick Lamar and Nipsey Hussle kind of doing that, where they use their music to be a beacon of hope for their communities and whatnot. They use their platform, and that's what I wanted New Breed to be. And then it's like, okay, well, the military, obviously, that's the ultimate service you can give to the world. But then with Baller's World and the content and Thorough and TCG, it's like, well, I want this. Everything was always lifestyle and community driven, which goes back to what I was talking about with what I learned, what I saw growing up. And then I was like, this is important. You create these communities, these support groups, whether it's through something that is similar, you know, a through line, whether it's sports, entertainment, product development, foot shoes, whatever it is, there's a community there, and you guys can really become a community and wield that influence and power and that purpose to help the world. And that's always been my through line with everything I did. It was never really about money, because if it was about money, I would have just taken it and done probably some shady things that I didn't really want to do, and it had a lot of money. I've had those opportunities. And again, when you're an entrepreneur, you're like,
Fork in
I
the
should have
road.
did that thing that time. Damn.
Yeah.
I'd be rich right now. but
Especially on a low
but
moment, you look back. But I think when you
yeah.
touched on that, like that through line, I think as you start to go through more of the roller coaster and you go through different careers, even maybe necessarily you don't, choose entrepreneurial ventures as your mainstay, but you go to different companies and you work your way up different corporate ladders and roles. And I think where I always see people get stuck, or that moment where they have that choice, is, well, if you could pick something from everything you've done along the way, what are the commonalities? Because you're always going to take on new challenges, you're always going to learn. But like, I always come back, I worked with a coach and she helped me define, like, what is your true beingness, and like, what are those things? And it comes to more of, if you're out in the middle of the ocean, like, what do I need to let go of that's no longer serving me anymore? What am I holding on too tightly to that I actually probably just need to nurture more because I'm scared of losing it? Or there's some form of like, if I let go of control of that, like, I don't know what's going to
Yeah.
happen. This is the only thing keeping me, stable right now. And I think sometimes just surrendering into it and letting go of, like, I have to be here in order to be happy, rather than like stopping and taking in everything you've done. Because how many times did you stop along the way and just like sit in gratitude for a moment, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that just happened. And like actually just like let it sink in with the people around you, like, we just did this.
I do it more now than I ever did. And that's, I'm in my 40s now. So I'm like, you know what? Kind of like, dang, that's dope. I'll just sit there sometimes, breathe, and just like, wow, that really just happened, man. Because it's fun. Like you said, I forget things. When I forgot about the restaurants, like those were two big moments in my life that were big parts of my life. And I just totally skipped over them. Like it just was a thing. And people are like, God, do you realize some of the things you've done? I'm like, what? I just did it. Like it's not a big deal. Or, I'm getting my PhD now and they're like, oh my God, you're doing that too. And I'm like, I
Think
don't
about it.
acknowledge the small things sometimes, because it's just like, I was supposed to do that. You're supposed to do that. So, and I guess that's probably where it comes from my parents, where like you said in the beginning, where there's not, they didn't say anything like, you better do
Yeah.
this. It's just kind of like
You
known,
felt it.
like, hey man, you, to who much is given, much is expected. You
Yep.
better, do something with all these opportunities. And I always tell people, like, I kind of tell myself that too, though. Like, I always say I owe. And I just say those two letters, I owe, but it's really IOWE. I owe
Yeah.
all the people who've helped me along the way. And
Yeah.
there is no doing it by yourself, right?
No.
I owe it to those people to be great. I owe it to my grandparents who went through real racism and segregation, not what we think it is today. I owe it to my dad who stayed alive and didn't get hooked on the crack, and didn't allow me to get tapped into, South Central gangbang mentality in LA. I owe it to him. I owe it to my mom for sacrificing her career so she could raise four boys, four badass, crazy boys, so I owe her, right? I owe my sons who weren't brought into this world, who didn't ask to be brought here. I owe it to them to provide for them.
Yeah.
I owe my two marriages. I owe them, even though, they didn't work out, but I owe them because, they allowed me, even though it was a lot of arguments and it was probably a lot of
Yep.
points of contention, but they raised my sons and they allow me to go do these things through their work, their efforts, and their stress, right?
Yeah.
And I understand that, and that's why I know that's my accountability. Like, I understand those things. But I owe all these people, and then I owe the kids and people after us, like, yo, man, you've been through a lot. Like, my story, I always joke around, it sounds like it's like Forrest Gump. Like, all these different things happen throughout my life that it's like, I feel like I just stumbled onto them. It's really weird, and they just happen now. But when I look back, I'm like, you didn't stumble onto it, man. Like, that was you learning your skills and your for this purpose that you're about to take on, and the mission that you're finally at a place now where this is what you're doing and this is what you're going to do from here on out, I think, and it took me in my 40s, gray hairs, gained weight, tired, divorced,
You
my
know?
kid, I got a kid going to college now, and so it's like, it took
Yeah.
all those things for me to get here
Yeah.
to where it's like, I can appreciate it and I understand my role now.
Yeah.
And which I thought I did before, but I look back like, you had
No
an idea,
idea.
but you
Yeah.
didn't get it. You didn't truly get it.
Yeah, we always have like, I always laugh with my friends too. I look back and I think about like 21-year-old Jenna, and I'm like, whew. And I was like, walking, like, I've got my shit dialed. Nobody can stop me. I've got life figured out. And then you think about who you were dating at the time, like, oh my God, what if I had married that guy? And like all those things, or like different life stuff. And you just realize that. And I think sometimes we gloss over that it's just not some magical unicorn and rainbows jump to being successful, or
No,
we're depending on when
no.
people meet you at certain points in your life of like, oh wow, like things are going so well for you, and you're like, well, yeah, maybe in this moment right now they are, but
Yeah.
it was not
You're
like
so
that.
lucky. Like, no, it ain't luck,
Yeah,
man.
luck had nothing to do with it. Like,
There is some luck, there's
of
some
course,
fortuitous moments for
yeah,
sure.
there's some
But nah,
timing and
man,
things gel and flow in
I got
just the right
bruises and
way.
bullet wounds to show you. I
Yeah.
earned this. Like, do not.
Yeah, totally. And well, and I think too, you touched on, constantly evolving and changing. And I think the line's so true that if I ever met somebody and they said to me, oh my God, you're the exact same person from like 10 years ago that I'm in high school, I'm like, I
That's an
would be
insult.
offended. And I was like, I really hope not. Maybe they can say I look as young as I did then. Sure, I'll take
Yeah.
it. But like anything else, I want no part of that. And it kind of touches back sort of, to where we're talking about TCG and bringing your family in and wanting this to kind of be a family and community venture, really, from its purpose. So, kind of, you touched on building that brand and it taking off like gangbusters, then COVID hits, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, now, there's excess spending going on or marketing and different jobs getting cut. Talk about sort of how you managed an apparel brand through COVID, and then kind of how that started to connect into your latest venture, ThoroMan.
Okay. So they're totally connected. So thoroughly crafted goods, our tagline was we make thoroughly crafted goods for the thoroughly crafted gentleman. And thoroughly crafted gentleman, for hashtag and marketing purposes, I shortened to Thorough Man.
Fair.
The thoroughly crafted gentleman. I was like, that's dope. That's the kind of guy we want buying our products. That's the
Yeah.
kind of guy we want to attract. This man that this James Bond, most
Yeah.
interesting man on earth kind of guy, right? Like he's
Yeah.
cool,
I hear
swagged
him like,
out.
I'm single, set me up, like, let's
Right.
go.
Exactly. The man every girl wants and the man that every man guy wants to be, right? And that's Thorough Man in the most positive way, not the toxic version of that, right? So thoroughly crafted gentleman, Thorough Man became kind of our tagline. And so, but at the same time, I'm doing mentorship all the time. Again, throughout everything I did, it's always been about community service and giving back. And I'm doing mentorship with Nancy Gale, like weekly almost at this point. And I really enjoy it. I was like, this is what I love doing this. I love,
Yeah.
I have my boys, and sometimes I know they kind of roll their eyes when I'm talking to them because as they're supposed to. I'm their dad. It's like, Dad, we hear this all the time,
Yeah.
man. We know. Leave us alone, But so I get that. But to be able to help other young men or young people, it wasn't just men back then, but young people was always, that was the battery in my back. I was like, this is what it's about, man. So I was doing that kind of freelance on the side, no structure to it. And when COVID hit, we went from, $1 million a year in revenue to like, I mean, a fraction of that, right? Like 15 people just stopped because they weren't going anywhere for 2 years, right? Especially out here in California. We went a little longer than a lot of other places. And so sales dropped and I was like, all right, well, and a lot of our retail partners went bankrupt. Some of the big box retailers that we were being sold in went bankrupt and they were closing stores. And we're like, all right, well, we were making our shoes in China, so we can't make any shoes, but hey, give us our shoes back and we'll go strictly direct to consumer online. And so during that process, it was, all right, COVID hit. We can't make shoes in China anymore. We got to find a new place. And I wanted to come back and do domestic manufacturing, which is what we're probably going to have to do now because Trump is putting tariffs on everybody. But we went from China to Europe, and we're making our shoes in Europe. And so we found that place during, after COVID, got a lot of our shoes back from our partners that went bankrupt, and we went straight direct to consumer. And so we were just floating on that for 2 years. And then we said, okay, we're going to start making our own shoes now again, and we're going to still stick to direct to consumer, and then we'll eventually get back into the retail space, once we kind of build up our cachet again and whatnot, or back in the, the brick and mortar space once we build up our cachet. But during that time, you had a lot of time to reflect. I'm like, and I couldn't go mentor the kids anymore because of COVID. I'm like, man, I said, I want to do this on my own. I want to, create a situation where, we have a nonprofit and our brand is really becomes like a symbol of this mission of the nonprofit. I don't want it to just be about shoes and money, like, and all that stuff. Like, no, I want our brand to represent something. You know, I want it to be, you know, when Tesla first came out, it was a symbol. It was like, you know, and people think about Elon now, but they're crazy because before he switched to being a Republican, we were all like thinking this was the greatest thing on earth, right? Collectively. And, you know, it was about, you know, green energy. It was about environmental, you know, sustainability and, you know, respecting the earth and all that stuff. So when I drive a Tesla, it's a symbol, you know, and I wanted my shoes to be like, okay, when I'm wearing these TCGs, I'm representing this ThoroMan life and this ThoroMan mentality, this aspiration of, you know, of improving yourself and being the best version of yourself, you know, every day. That's what I want my shoes to represent. And I needed a nonprofit that was associated with us to speak to that. And so in doing that, I had a couple friends say, Kyle, man, you know, you need to just like really jump into this ThoroMan thing. Cause I was talking to people about my philosophy behind it and all that. It's like, Kyle, that's needed right now, man. Like young men are in a crisis and, you know, there's no options for them. No, if you're a heterosexual male and you have any kind of issues, people just say, get over it, go fix it. You know, that's just how we treat men. Right. And granted, part of it was earned through all the horrible things before past generations, you know, and I get it. I get why we think that way.
It's
But
a massive opportunity for men
exactly,
and women to come together because both sides are hurting, and rather like us
exactly,
versus them, we
exactly.
gotta come together. Yeah.
Yeah. And then before you can even come together, you got to work on yourself.
Yep.
You got to take care of self. So yes, masculinity is a valuable tool in a society. Like we wouldn't be here without it. Right. But not balanced. Like I said earlier, it can become toxic, as they say, or it can become detrimental. And I think we're at a stage now where a lot of those old tropes are becoming detrimental, where, you know, it goes back to our fathers. You know, they came back from Vietnam, they came back from these wars. Men have to go die for this country. You know, you're taking abuse at work. The family's dependent on me. I'm stressed out. I got to figure out how we're going to make these bills. And no one's offering you any therapy, any help, any
just
concern.
be a man.
It's
Be a
just
man.
go
Figure it
do
out.
it, figure it out, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And these guys are coming back broken and working every day broken, and nobody's helping them or giving them the tools that they can manage it themselves if they need to. So that's what I wanted to speak to. And I started doing these, you know, one-off events and inviting a lot of my friends, and people were supporting what we're doing. And the response I got was crazy. The teachers, the kids, the mentors, everybody's like, Kyle, this is amazing in what you're doing. Do more of this. I'm like, okay, how do I do more of this when I have this thing over here and I have to take care of the for-profit side?
Yep.
And I'm like, what do I do? And so, again, this is luck and fortuitousness that I met Father Boyle. Now, Father Boyle, we had the event with Alder, and I met with Father Boyle, and Father Boyle is the founder of Homeboy Industries. And Homeboy Industries is a nonprofit that reacclimates, you know, formerly incarcerated and gang members back into society, help them get jobs, help them get mental therapy, help them tattoo removal, all this stuff to where they can function. So how he funds it, though, is he funds it through social enterprises where, all right, nobody's going to hire these dudes. You know, that's just not how this works.
Tough when there's like neck and face tattoos to be like, welcome, they're going to come, you know, clean your house. You're like,
exactly. It's like, but so instead of relying on that, like he said, instead of being vulnerable to other people's, you know,
perceptions,
short-sightedness, let's create our own businesses that generate money, B, hire these people and pay them salaries and give them resume
living
experience.
wage.
And so he just created this whole ecosystem of, we're going to create these businesses. You're going to go through our program before you could work at it. And now you're going to work, run, manage, go work somewhere else, or, you know, or start your own thing based on this. And I was like, oh my God, TCG could be the social enterprise for ThoroMan. So I have it to where 100% of TCG's profits fund ThoroMan, in addition to grants, fundraising, events, all the things we're going to do over there. But I said, okay, now I could connect them to where there is true synergy between these two businesses. And now I don't have to worry about the profit margin and all this and that, because everything's going to go toward the nonprofit now. So now the brand is true representative of this ThoroMan mission, you know, which is to, you know, the mission basically is to like empower young men to unlock their full potential with mentorship, education, and inspiration, right? That's through a holistic approach. It's taking off on, a whole nother level. It's
So you're taking a holistic approach through empowering
yes.
young men. And is it kind of a certain age demographic that you're focusing on?
So right now we're just doing high school boys.
Okay.
But the goal is funny because my board kind of narrowed me in, because I come in there like, we could do this. We want to do this. I want to do prisons. I want to do military. I want to do all these guys that have sports teams, because being in the military, being on a sports team, I taught, part of my, like I said, my mission has always been this. I was teaching classes and business stuff in prisons. Sometimes I would go there and teach classes. And so I've been in all these environments, and I'm like, they need it too, but board was like, Kyle, we don't know what we have. Let's focus. Let's get it. Let's just train it. So it's okay. Let's do high school boys. Let's get to them preemptively. Let's be preventative. And hopefully they don't end up in the prisons and all these other things. Let's get them now before they become men, official men, have to go die for this country. They can vote. They can do all these different things. And you're going to have stressors that you never thought you had before, because your parents aren't there to take all the bullets for you anymore. So we focused on high school boys. So we went from doing these one-off events, 501c3 status, we're a 501c3. And now we're part of, school curriculums where we weekly are doing these classes for the senior boys at these schools. So it really, again, it was me just sitting back, I felt vulnerable again. It was that vulnerability with TCG. I'm like, nah, I don't want to do this. Like, yeah, we're doing fine. I said, but I want to make what I'm doing in my spare time full time, right? So let me link these two things so I can still do both, at the same time. And it makes sense. And now my brand can fund this. So I'm not stressed about the money over here anymore. We're just going to do this. And, you take a hit financially, but I think it's totally worth it. I'm not, I did enough things in the past to where I can live off of it, for a while at a certain level, so I'll be okay. So I'm not stressed about the income.
Yeah.
It's
And I know
more
you
so,
mentioned like vulnerability a couple times in points. And as I kind of like we go through more of your story, what I think it actually is I think it's integrity. And I think that like you get when you're off track and you're not living in alignment with who you are, you get that, like, for me, it's a sinky gut pit
yeah,
feeling, and I get a
yeah.
pain right kind of in my diaphragm region. I'm like, oof, something's off. I'm either not having a conversation with somebody that I need to have that is going to be a monumental shift of like, I need you to step up and meet me here, or I'm going to exit you out of my life, or I'm not choosing something or not working with people that's really fulfilling me in some kind of way. And so I think it's interesting that all the pieces have kind of prompted you and kind of almost circled you back into that kind of core foundation that you talked about, of that the family, community, and connectedness, and really kind of wanting to shape the future of young men to kind of continue what you experienced, knowing that it could have gone a completely other direction for you.
Yeah.
In terms of the in-class sort of curriculum, is there any sort of particular focus that you're doing in class, or is it you speaking, or you bringing in other people, and sort of how are you kind of engaging these young men into the ThoroMan mission?
So, yeah. So all of the above. So it's funny what you just said. Like we're kind of, syncing off each other here, because every day I have them stand up, and before we start, I have them say self, family, community. And I told them, I said, that's the order of operations. Kind of like in algebra where you have the order of operations and before you solve the problem. I said, the order of operations for you guys, for us, is self, then family, then community. You have to take care of yourself. You skip one of these, it's going to fall. You have to go self first, because how are you going to, you have to make sure your mind, body, spirit, finances, everything is secure enough to where you can then take care of a family, have a family. And that doesn't mean kids and a wife. That could be siblings, that could be parents, that could be your
whatever
community,
that
your
looks
village,
like.
whatever that looks like. But, how can you help them if you haven't helped yourself yet? And then if you haven't done any of those two, how dare you go back and try to help the community? How dare you skip your family? If you're going to be out here helping the other people, why aren't you taking care of your family? Why aren't you taking care of your kids? Why haven't you fixed yourself before you actually out here helping each other? Because eventually, if you just skip those two and go straight to like, I want to give back, and it's like, well, you're not going to be able to do it because maybe you have some issues that you haven't dealt with that are going to take you away from that mission. You don't have the financial security to do that. You don't have the knowledge and the bandwidth to take that on. And maybe, what if your family, your kids aren't eating, your bills aren't being paid, you're getting evicted, whatever the case may be. Like, you have to take care of all that other stuff first. So it's self, family, community. And that's how we start every day. But what I do is it's a hybrid of I don't do a whole So there are moments where I do this a fireside chat kind of thing where we're just talking in front of the kids, Q&A. But the way I really want to do it, I want to integrate the mentors that I bring in there. The mentors I bring in there are high level people, experts in their field, different fields, all politics, business, education, finance, sports. We have people in all the worlds, right? And they come in and I say, you're not going to be a guest. You're going to be a co-host with me for the day. So they stand up there with me. I kind of go through my curriculum that I create for every topic in every class. And then I integrate them into the conversation where it's like, hey, blah, 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 blah. We had this thing. Well, hey, John, what do you think about that? When did you have to go through that thing? And then it's like, then the kids start asking questions, or I ask the kids first, let them answer, and then I let the guests answer. So it's kind of a full on integration where we're just having a class and they're kind of co-leading the class with me instead of being a mentor. And, I want to take the holistic approach of throughout the year, we do it in modules where the first part is we work on like you're really yourself, like mental awareness, mental health tools, personal development, soft skills, all these things that you need to understand. All of you guys are 17, 18 years old, and you're about, again, as soon as you hit 18, ball game changes. Everything you do has consequences now. And there's certain requirements on you that you weren't, there's certain requirements and opportunities or things that you can do now that you're 18, right?
Yeah,
so
how you show up
the whole
matters.
world changes for you. Yeah. So develop these personal skill sets. Then I do a little bit of business financial literacy.
Yep.
And the reason I do that is, I mentioned I'm getting my PhD now in health and human services in this. That's how much I dove into this. I said, all right, I'm going all in on this, right? So health and human services is what I'm getting it in. And so a lot of my research on my dissertation has been, I noticed that one of the leading causes of mental, adverse outcomes and mental health issues in men is financial hardship, because there is a different responsibility on us than there is women, because there aren't any options for out there, and because we aren't allowed to really express that frustration, through stigma in society. So a lot of that leads to depression, which men are skyrocketing and leading in, homelessness, which men by far outnumber because there's no shelters or help for men in that situation.
Yep.
There's a lot of women's shelters, but there's no like men shelters, right? So so we have home, which then eventually leads to suicide, which men are skyrocketing and leading in, right? So all these things, and a lot of it comes from financial hardship. So I'm like, look, guys, I'm going to give you a very basic understanding, kind of some of the things we're talking about here, but of the mindset of business, but why it's important to have an understanding of business. Not because all of us are going to go out there and be entrepreneurs, but if you're at a job, if you're operating in the world, you're in America where capitalism is the system. There's been wars fought over this, right? So you need to have a basic understanding of how business works, because everything in America is essentially a business. Even the things you don't think are business, your church, school, politics, it's all revolves around money and finance and transactions, right? So you guys need to have a basic understanding of business and financial literacy. I'm not going to go too deep into it. I'll give you the books and the starting points to where you can dive deeper. This isn't a business course, but you can, we can go into that, right? And then I end with community. So again, it's like a self-family community thing I'm doing, where I tell them like, look, guys, like, we all owe. The whole thing I'm talking about with I owe, you have to give back. It's your duty as a person who's thriving in society to give back, because, again, we're living in a capitalist society that it's built on exploitation. So if you're working at a company, or if your business is doing well, or whatever the case may be, somebody's being exploited to make that thing happen, right? Capitalism thrives off cheap labor. It thrives off all these different things. So even if you think you're doing it alone, you're not doing it alone. Somebody helped you along the way. I'm here in class helping you guys, so it's like, you owe me now, so pay it forward, right? I'm not looking to say you owe me. I'm just saying that as in, it's our duty to like say, somebody helped me, somebody who didn't have to give me a bit of information, $1 that day to buy a snack, didn't have to help me, give me a ride, a person that didn't pay for that, that class or that team, or or that book, or that person that gave you that bit of information, that knowledge. You owe all those people along this way, that introduction, that you owe all these people. So no, you don't have to go pay them back, individually, but you owe them through your actions. You owe them through being the best person you could be. You owe them through paying it forward to the next person. That's how you pay it back, by being a good person, and helping somebody else who might have been in a similar situation to you, or who just may need a little help that day. even a positive word might help them, right? So it's just, you owe this to the world. So be very philanthropic in your thinking,
Yeah.
and in your behaviors. So that's kind of how the modules go, and the course is, where we take them on this self, family, community kind of journey throughout the year. And then by the end of it, they have the tools. I make them get LinkedIn accounts, because I'm like, y'all don't understand how important that is. And if you don't do it with me, you're gonna have to do it at some point, because you're
Yeah.
gonna probably get hired through your job with a resume on LinkedIn, the way things are going,
Absolutely.
right?
Well, and that's why
So,
developed the individual excellence program, because interviewed tons of people, and especially in younger generation, whether they don't have LinkedIn or what they have on there, how they're showing up. There's not really great programs to prepare young people to enter the workforce, how to talk about your strengths when you have zero work experience, and really understanding how to communicate that, or like transferable skill sets or examples of things you've done, whether it's in sports or volunteer work, and how that's going to be meaningful in a job. And I think it's a big piece missing. And so I love being able to take people through that, because it's not you that's not getting the job. It's the way you're showing up, and somebody else has taken the time or got prepared better or whatever that's getting it. There's actually nothing wrong with you. And we can fix all those things in terms of how you communicate. And again, different companies, different verbiage to use, and all the different things to really get that foot in the door to allow you to kind of get through that next step in your life. And I think, you touched on, men in a challenging time. And if I move specifically, to young men, depression, suicide, I think feeling somewhat isolated, that there is, now negative connotations of really being a masculine man or too masculine, and then being too feminine. And how do you play in between that? And then how do you connect with, women in that aspect? I'm curious, because you're sitting with all these young men all the time, is also because there's massive political things happening on top of, just being a teenager and life being already hard in general, figuring out, who you are and what you want to be. Are they able to communicate with you of what's really missing or what's really going on for them right now and what support that they need? Or is it more uncovering that they need help in your kind of room?
you don't know what you don't know, right? So I don't think a lot of them even thought about it. And that's kind of like the biggest takeaway I get from them. Cause, they come up to me like, oh, Mr. Cox, can we just want to stay here with you all day, and we don't want to go to class and all this stuff, because they're like, no one's ever talked to us like this before. And I said, yes, they have. You just weren't paying attention. I said, I guarantee you that a lot of the things I'm saying, your parents said it to you. Your coach said it to you. There's teachers here who said it to you. I said, you guys listen to, I said, Nipsey Hussle had a whole thing called The Marathon. That was kind of what I'm talking about. Kobe Bryant had Mamba Mentality, which was he wrote a book about it. That was the whole thing I'm talking about. I said, I'm not saying anything that's like groundbreaking. I may be presenting it and putting it in a way that's, different and more
Landing.
digestible for you guys. And plus you're forced to sit here with me, once a week and really do
Yeah.
this, instead of passively listening to Nipsey Hussle or Kendrick or whoever was,
Yeah.
or Jay-Z or whoever's been talking this stuff. You've heard it before. You just didn't know you heard it before. So I said, but
Yeah.
they're like, man, nobody's ever talked to us like this, man. Like this is great. They're asking questions, how can, they're connecting on LinkedIn with me on things now. And
Yeah.
they didn't know that they didn't know these things, and I'm like, I'm telling you guys. And then I just keep it real with them. Like, look, this is what's
Yeah.
about to be expected of you. This is what you're about to walk into. Everything you guys are going through, I've been through that. Trust me. The guys I
Yeah.
bring in here, we've all been through everything you're talking about that you're about to go through. So let's take it,
Yeah.
and so that's been my main thing, is that they're just happy that somebody is talking to them in a way that matters, because it's really about consistency, right? You can come, there's all these programs, there's like, big brother, little brother kind of programs, right? Where let me go take the kid to the Lakers game, once a year, or we'll go to Disneyland or something. It's like, yeah, that's cool. But I mean, that kid still got to go home to his problems. That kid still doesn't have the tools to deal with all that. That was a cool experience and all that, and that's important. And that, because, it is opening their worldview that there's more to life than wherever you come from. But for them, that is where they still have to go back to. So it's about consistently being with them. And the fact that I'm there every week and the people I'm bringing in are super successful, high net worth, and those are two different things. They're not just high
Yeah.
net. They're successful people too, who aren't high net, but they're taking time out to come talk to you guys because of me, because I have
Yeah.
the relationship with them. And again, that pays homage to the fact that you do owe other people that. If you are a good person, people genuinely are good to you,
Yeah.
so your network is important. And they're like, man, this is great. We love this. That's kind of been the biggest takeaway, is just, again, like, they're just happy somebody's here talking to them and telling them this consistently. not
Yeah,
just kind of talk. And then I'm not talking down to them, lecturing them like,
of
you
course.
better, you guys need to do this. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I've been here, guys. Let me tell you about when I did this stupid thing when I was your age. Oh, I was at this same school, these same hallways which you guys are at right now. I was here. I played basketball. I did these things. Here's some stuff that went down when I was here. They're like, oh, okay. Because your parents aren't going to tell you a lot of these things because parents have to hold that, they have to present an image to you of sometimes, right? And I'm like, I don't have to do that. I have no horse in this race. So I'm going to be real with you guys, right? So I think their appreciation of that was probably the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think even as like I work with entrepreneurs that are like the solopreneurs before they're the multi-serial founders, I think I call it my superpower. It's not a KPI on a dashboard, but being able to create a safe space. And so that's
Yeah.
what's always worked really well for me, being kind of like that number two to entrepreneur or being in that position myself is there's a judgment free zone. But one of the biggest questions I ask entrepreneurs before I work with them, I say, who's your support team? Like, who's your quarterback? Like, who do you
Yeah.
have around you? So I
Yeah.
think people forget. And again, especially with men, don't talk about, I'm like, listen, every entrepreneur I work with has a therapist, has a business coach, maybe has a different therapist to work through a different thing that they're going through. Like, they have a bunch of people that are around them to help them perform because they don't have everything figured out. They're not the best at everything. They're really passionate about the one thing they're trying to bring to life, but sometimes they don't have the highest EQ. So they miss reading signs from a team and they're just going on and on and on and can't read the room and they've lost everybody and they wonder why they're getting low culture performance scores. And then kind of looping back to that word consistency is what are you doing every day? Because that's going to do wonders for you. And it can be a really healthy thing or it can be a detrimental thing to you. And so, if being able to prioritize things is important, it's like, oh, okay, so do you say no to going out? Because like, I know that I need to get 8 hours of sleep or I need to make time because I have to work out in the morning because I have one window, whether it's 4 to 5 a.m. or 6 to 7 a.m. That's it. And then I got to do that. And all those habits build. And I think that you creating that safe space for them, I think to realize that recognizing when somebody shows up and shows up for you every week, that's important.
Yeah. And that's part of that community thing, right? Like you have this community, you hit on it. You need a good team of people around you, honest people around you as well. And then that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with sacrifice. Sometimes you got to cut those things off and cut certain people off because those cancers, they'll rot and they'll spread. And you need to take care of that because as much as a good team will help you, one bad apple in there could ruin everything.
Yeah.
Everything. And it might be somebody you're not expecting. It might be somebody who's been
Nope.
close to you your entire life, your best friend, your girlfriend, your boyfriend. It might be, it might be something, your
Yeah.
mentor, your parents. It might be somebody who you didn't expect to have to cut off.
Yeah.
And not cut off, just kind of let them be themselves and let them do their thing.
Yeah.
But you have to keep moving forward, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying just cut people off and be that, you don't have to do
No,
all
but we've
that.
all had those experiences where I
Yeah.
call it like it's your first heartbreak in terms of like your professional world where you held on really tight, knowing you're like, no, they'll change. I got this. And then when you finally kind of have to break up and you're like, oh, like I will always remember that one person because it changed how I went forward and how I looked and either developed people or knew that they weren't going to be a right fit for me. And no harm, no foul. I'm just not going to bring you in the tent then.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the whole point of what we're trying to do. Like, again, I wanted to make it a holistic thing because there's a lot of people doing what we're doing it, but I wanted to present it in a way that was really digestible. There's a lot of, you could read a lot of philosophy books and all this stuff, but how many kids from these certain underserved communities even know about these, philosophy books about some Greek, philosopher or, some old ancient proverbs and stuff. They don't have access to that stuff. But if I could present it in a way that's digestible for them, then I think now we have something. Now it's open to everybody because this isn't just like a black or brown kid thing. This is a every man thing because I think it's not just a black or brown boys thing. This is all boys, right? I mean, the mass shooters at all these schools aren't black or brown usually, right? So there's a lot of issues going on with every community in this country.
Well, yeah, and there was a great article about, the theory behind that and that like isolation is one of the biggest reasons of feeling alone, right? And I think
Yeah.
that in such a divisive time, the things that stand out is being kind is probably one of the biggest things you could be to somebody at this point and not knowing what somebody is going through when you meet them and offering them that grace to kind of not hold it against them or maybe get a little bit curious. And I think too, we talked about especially, getting help. And I think especially from my experience in underserved communities, is talking about therapy and getting mental health support is somewhat taboo, or we keep it in the family and we don't talk about it with other people, and like letting those struggles and generational trauma continue because that seems like it's not for everybody, or it's only for ultra wealthy people who can afford a therapist. And that's not the case now, especially with tech and being able to have different platforms that make things so much more affordable to work with therapists rather than just, going to an office. And I think that a really strong message to get across that everybody needs help, and
Yeah,
getting help is actually really exciting and courageous and brave, and it's not shameful.
exactly. And that's the stigma you want to get rid of. I even look part of another reason why this was like, really important for my dad and I is that we do have that mental illness in my family, right? Where we have the natural mental illness, like where my mom's side, all the elders on my mom's side, they all pretty much have mostly died from dementia, right? That's what killed them, in the long term. But I have a cousin who committed suicide on my dad's side, and my younger brother is bipolar and addicted to drugs now, and just, kind of out here in the wind. And we've been trying to help him, and he just refused. You got to kind of not cut off, like I said, but you got to let him figure it out on his own for a minute, right? Until he's willing to come back and accept all the help we're trying to give him. But that right there, I look at it. I look back at my cousin. He committed suicide when he was 18. And my brother, I look back on him, he was probably suffering from this mental illness the entire time. And he started self-medicating
To
young,
help, yeah.
smoking weed and doing, then obviously that becomes not enough. If you
Yeah.
don't get real help with it, then it just elevated to harder drugs. Right.
Yep.
And I think that's where it started, but there wasn't an environment there. We loved him. My parents were loving, great parents. There
Yeah.
was no abuse going on there or anything like that. But, being big brother, I'm 6, 7 years older than him. And it's like, quit crying, shut up, and that kind of stuff that big brothers do. I'm guilty of it, right? You're around your friends who are like, quit acting like a pussy and all these kind of things, right? That people do. And then my dad, it's like, oh, you'll be okay. Just, this and that. And we didn't create an environment, not maliciously, but we just didn't create an environment because that was culturally where we are in society, where he probably felt comfortable to say, hey, I have a problem. I need help. And
Yeah.
he just dealt with it on his own quietly. And I look back at some of his behaviors going back, and I'm like,
There was
he was
something.
going through
Yeah.
it then. Yeah, it was, we
Yeah.
were calling him, names for it, but he was going through it then, right? And so that part of me also, that's another reason why, like, let's get to these guys. And I think for him, it happened in high school. That's why when I had to narrow it, I said, well, let's do high school, because
Yeah.
both of them, I think we lost in high school. And he was a football player. So I think his brain CTE stuff might have
Yeah.
added to it, right? So
Contributed
in
for
addition
sure.
to, yeah, yeah,
Well, I think that's a tough part when you see different addictions and mental illnesses come up. We've had lots of suicides in my family. I remember and I got terribly bullied in high school. And you think back to kind of the who you have around you. And even if your family doesn't, have, we'll call it like a toxic household, or, you're not getting beat when you get home and you have all this. One of the biggest things, I think I learned kind of going through therapy and understanding pieces of what you need. You can have quote unquote, the best parents, but depending on how you grew up, they still not might have the tools you needed in order to be successful in certain areas. And I think, it's healthier now. I remember when I started going to therapy, my mom's like, well, if there's stuff about us, like you can let us know, like we want to hear about it. And if I look back and I said, when it got really bad in high school, and to be fair, I didn't say how bad it was, but you guys got a bit of a dose of it. I know you asked me if I wanted to go to therapy and I shut it down. I think that you should have forced me and said we need minimum like 10 sessions. And if you don't want to go after that, that's okay, but we want to get you in the right way. Like, I think that would have helped. I'm thankful I had such strong people around me. It would have gone way worse because I definitely had suicidal thoughts at one point. And I was like, this is tough. Like, how much can one person take? Like, I'm getting followed
yeah,
to school. I'm getting like punched in the head with eggs.
yeah,
Like, this is like not a
yeah,
situation that's going to continue well. And she was like, like, I didn't think about it like that. We should have. And, they wanted to kind of almost give me an easy out too. Like, let's just transfer schools. I'm like, well, no, because like these people are graduating, next year and it'll be fine. But I think it was still that like perception, even from my sense, is like, I'm weak if I do that. and like wanting to be like, I'm tough, I'm strong, I'll
Yeah.
get through that.
Yeah.
Knowing that I'm like, oh man, I would have probably done, XYZ. And it all builds that resilience for sure. And I was able to come out of it in a positive way versus super negative. But there was definitely some ones were like very fine line between it going down the other path for
Yeah.
sure.
And then as as you get older, you realize too, as parents, like they don't know. Like you gotta think about it. Like our parents were probably parents really young. Like that's just what it was back then, right? Like most parents were, especially from our generation, were in their 20s. In 20s trying to raise another person, like, they don't know. They don't A lot of parents just don't know. There are some that are just like truly, truly messed up people, but a lot of times they just don't know. They're learning as they go too, right? And then they're just they just kind of do some of the things that were done to them when they were young, and they just think that's how to be a parent. So that's how these things kind of continue. But it's interesting how you said, even as a woman or a girl at that point that, you felt a stigma about it, right?
Yep.
And that's just, it needs to be destigmatized just in general. Even aside from that, I think even bigger than destigmatizing it, from a male perspective, I think a lot of this communication and therapy, I think it's done from for lack of a better word, like a female centric perspective, right?
Yep.
Like, and that's part of the reason why men have a really big stigma with it, is that it's done a lot of these things were created or talked about. Like, here's how you communicate. It's like, well, let's acknowledge the fact that men and women are inherently different. So sometimes the communication methods and the tools it's not a universal approach. You need to have things that are gender specific. And I think a lot of this stuff isn't very gender specific to men at all. And it's like, sometimes it may not even be, I need to sit down to talk. We're more physical. We're more aggression based, going back naturally to our position in society for the, in the little village we had to protect and provide and do all those things to fight off the animals and the other tribes or whatever the case may be, right? So maybe it is as simple as, hey, let's do a group exercise thing. It might be like actual physical,
Yeah.
stuff that may need to go instead of just talking. Like there has to be more thought put into it to make it
Yeah.
more specific to men, to where it's like, oh, we're just gonna do this one, one size fits all approach. And I think that adds to the stigma when it's like, nah, man, that's not how, I don't want to talk like that. Like, yeah, we have to acknowledge the fact that I know we want to have all this equality and everything, and that's great, and we should, but we do have to acknowledge the fact that there are biological differences, physiological differences between us. And then sometimes you need to make those things apparent and you need to adjust to fit that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when I keep saying I want to make it digestible. That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do, is make it digestible to where like, oh,
Yeah.
I get it now. You're not just
For
telling me
sure.
to go sit in front of you and start crying. And I'm like,
No.
no, I'm not trying. I mean, that's okay if you want to do that.
Yeah, if you got to
There's
get it
no
out, get
judgment.
it out. Like crying is
Get it out.
okay. Yeah.
But I'm not coming at you with only that kind of thing. And I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people see, even if it's not true. That's how a lot of men view
Yeah.
therapy. You're going to go in there and tell me to act like what
Cry.
I think
Yeah.
is what a female's supposed to act like. It's like, okay, if the goal is to get people to do therapy and to like appreciate it and to like really embrace it, then let go of this not notion that you have as a therapist and saying you have to do it this way and we're going to do it this way, and say, okay, how do I adjust this in flexibility? How are we going to be flexible with these male patients to get them not only to go but to actually embrace it and
Yeah.
use the practices? And I think that's what's lacking too.
For
you
sure.
know
And I think it was Tim Ferriss or Simon Sinek in one of their podcasts. And I think they did a good sort of reword of it and they called it mental fitness. And they approached it that way of being able to kind of dig in. And I think if you were like, if I want to perform and I want to be at my best, my brain's what I need to train. And my brain's causing me all these problems, whether it's self doubt and being able to go into that. And I think what I've tried to do now, continuing still to do the work because it doesn't just stop. You evolve, like we said, new hurdles, new roller coasters, new things. You're like, oh, I wasn't fully prepared for that. And I think I need to like go figure out how to deal with that better. I want to show up in this way and this is affecting me. And I think that I've really tried to prioritize being really open and being vulnerable in any client friendship of struggles I've gone through, who I've worked with, because it hasn't just been talk therapy. There's like lots of different modalities. And I'm like, listen, like, it's kind of like Cinderella. You got to kiss a bunch of toads before you find your prince. You're going to meet different therapists. You're going to meet different things of like combinations of things. And you got to just figure out what really works for you and build that support team around you. And
yeah
if you choose one modality over the other, it's not better than or worse than. Everybody's built different. What works for you is not going to work for me. Or we might find something that we both really connect with and like helps us shape and grow. And I think that really like bringing that conversation to life. And I know it feels like there's a bit more momentum now from the male perspectives of things where I'm starting to see a lot more like men's work, like groups and like just different things to like allow safe spaces to just get off your chest, whatever you need to. And more, as you mentioned, like sometimes there's going to be a physical component of like release to kind of go back to that like primal, urge and cognitive function, which I think is amazing. And so I kind of want to sort of start to kind of culminate to sort of everything from there of integrity, self, community, kind of putting the oxygen mask on before any yourself before you worry about anybody else to kind
Yeah.
of thrive and survive in this world, and then being able to create something along the way that connects you deeper into your family and community, whatever that looks like. And it makes me kind of curious if you're to look back of all the different businesses, all the different teams, highs, lows, is there a defining moment for you when everything just clicked and you're like, "Oh, I'm built for this."
I think I think it's multiple. It's the fact that there have been so many hurdles. Like when I go through things, like I'm talking about the greatest economic crash since the Depression, divorces, and then COVID. I'm like, these are major hurdles that I'm like, man, all of those things normally break people, and no, it didn't break me. Each one of those things made me better. It made me stronger. It built a callus. I feel bulletproof at this point. I was like, if I could survive those things, those are, like I said, economic, divorce, and pandemic, which was like an economic slash war slash everything,
Yeah.
mental, turbulence, it was everything in one. And I survived those things. Yo, I'm built for this. That's kind of, that's
Yeah.
what it came down to, and I'm still here and I'm doing better than I ever was, and it finally all is clear and makes sense after going through those moments of hell, where you don't know what you're going to do. You're depressed. I mean, you're sad. You're like all over the place. Right. And I'm here still talking to you. I got my oldest son is going to an Ivy League level school, and I got my other two, and I'm like, everybody's thriving. I'm doing great. The nonprofit is booming. We got some amazing things coming up after this is our first year of officially being a nonprofit versus the other things we're doing.
Right.
And the interest I'm getting from people, the grants, what we're going to do on the digital front with the
Yeah.
platform that we're building, all these things, and schools want to be on board. And I'm like, I went through all that, man, and I survived all that, and I'm still here. And I'm like, yeah, as you say, I'm built for this. You can't tell me shit at this point, So
And I always like to pivot from that to, we'll call it either like what would you say would be like a major challenge, kind of failure or breakthrough that became kind of, your ultimate test? And it could be a funny one. I think of the time where I shredded a $500,000 bank draft thinking that I was like keeping it safe because we weren't using it anymore. And then apparently that was just like shredding $500,000, and we had to do like affidavits, and they're like, you need to prove that you did, like you shredded it. I'm like, the garbage was already taken out, like they saw me do it.
oh my God.
And I was like, okay, never do that again.
Yeah. So you're saying that kind of that breakthrough moment.
Yeah, or like a failure where you're just like, I actually can't believe like I just did that or this happened, where you just kind of like, that's your sort of like test of kind of that mental grit or, fortitude to kind of move forward from, that like, oof.
A moment. I think again, for me, I think the breakthrough really came like in COVID, honestly,
Yeah.
where
Everything halted.
yeah, everything stopped. Everything was just, it was like, what is gonna, are we gonna be dead?
Yeah.
I don't know what's about to happen. Are we about to go to war?
Is it the zombie apocalypse? Yeah.
Yeah, like, those first few months were crazy if you
They
really go
were.
back to remember what we were thinking at that moment. That and my sons, I'm like, I got my son doing Zoom with me. I got my wife over here tripping out, losing her mind. I got the little boy, the babies not knowing exactly what's going on. And that was really like a moment where I was like, oh, okay, I got to Zoom. I got to really tighten this up and really, no more. We got to figure this out. I got to make this work, but I got to make it be something that and that's what I'm about. And I got to figure out how to make my purpose come to life now.
Yeah.
It can't just be my, my side chick. It's got to become my main chick, right?
Yeah.
I got my purpose has to become the main the main attraction, not the feature.
Yeah.
Right. And it was really that moment, honestly. I mean, I wish I had, I'm sure there are funny ones. Again, I told you, like, you asked me what I did 2 weeks ago, and I'm
Yeah.
like, but
Yeah.
I know as soon as I get off, like, oh, I should have told that story. But it was really, that was, I always say COVID was the moment, man. It was the moment. It was the moment where everything came together. People exposed themselves. The world exposed itself to me on a different level. And then it forced me to change my mindset, like to a level that I've never had to before. Like, you have to, this is crazy. You don't know, this can end all, again, that vulnerability. Like, it was, I was more bulletproof than I was in, in 08, 10, 12 years before. But that vulnerability again, like, man, you got to get this together. And that was,
Yeah.
and you just watched everything stop. Like, again,
Yeah.
like we're doing, I'm like, you're online and you see your online sales, 40, 50 grand a month, and then the store and everything was just moving. I'm like, man, this is going to be big. This is going to be, but it's funny because I feel like I was getting so, again, my side chick was my passion and my philanthropy stuff, but
Yeah.
I was so excited about the money. I was like, oh my God, we got, orders coming in from Nordstrom, orders coming in from, from Saks and all these different
Yeah.
people, and online is booming. All these athletes and celebrities are wearing our shoes and blah, 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 blah. And I think I was like, I was like, Kyle, you were focused on the wrong things, brother. You lost track, and that's when I said, nope, bring it back. Never again. I'm going to focus. I'm going to make the passion the thing, and to where this thing that I do love and that is fun and enjoyable
Yeah.
can feed that versus the passion feeding this stuff, so
Yeah.
that was kind of my moment.
So if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
I say this, I have no regrets in my life. Definitely, but there are things that I would do differently if,
Yes.
because
We all have
if you don't do
those,
it
yeah.
differently, you didn't learn from it, right? But I would say just stay super focused. Don't feel like you need to rush to grow up and be an adult, because I got, married early. I
Yeah.
had kids, I wanted all that. And I was in a rush. And the focus even before that was, again, it was that sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I was, being a good athlete in high school, being pretty popular or whatever, and whatever that means. But the girls and all those things, like, stay focused, man. I tell my son, I was like, look, I want you to have fun. Go have fun and enjoy yourself, because that's how you learn in life. I said, but if I could really tell you how much time and money, and if I put a value to the time that I spent, chasing these, low vibrational, feel good kind of, vices, where it's women, whether it's
Instant
alcohol, whether it's the party,
gratification. Yeah.
instant gratification. I mean, it's probably, if I put a value to the time and the amount of actual money, is well over $1 million, that I put into like that stuff. Right. And it's like, and I don't regret it, because it's why I am today. It's why I can talk to these young men the way I can, the why they listen to me a little differently, because they're like, oh, he actually went through it. Like, he knows what he's talking about, so, and I could tell you guys all the stories ahead of time, because I'm not that dad that didn't have any experiences and he just doesn't know what to tell you or what to expect. Like, your dad actually went through all this stuff. So that's the plus side of it. So it's almost like I paid for a class almost, right? I say that was just school. I was learning, so I paid to learn. But if I can go back and tell myself, say, dude, don't rush. There's no rush to have a family. There's no rush to be this old man. There's no rush to, you're not missing out on that party or those girls or whatever the case may be. None of that even means anything to me anymore. Like, as a, I barely remember half of it anyway. Right. So it's like, but, I remember having a good time, but just wait, man, it'll all come. And I always tell them, the dumbest thing I said as a kid was, I used to, you're arguing with your parents, I can't wait till I'm grown. And I remember saying that to my parents. And that was probably the stupidest thing I ever said in my life, because being young and learning was the best time of your life, so don't rush to get out of it. Don't be afraid to try new things, but also understand what really has value and what doesn't have value. And I know I can tell you this, son, and young men, like, but you're gonna have to learn on your own. But these are just words. But you'll look back and say, okay, I get what he's saying now. But so don't rush. Wait, man, take your time, enjoy the moments, and there's no need, man. That's what I would tell myself. Like, don't feel rushed, man.
Yeah. I think it's important. Yeah, for sure. You're always like wanting to speed things up and get to kind of the destination versus really being present in the journey
Right.
along the way
The
to get
journey's the
there.
shit.
Yeah.
The journey's the shit, man. That's the best part.
I know.
We see all these popular guys on TV and they're rich and successful and popping bottles and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But no, man, what they went through to get there, that's the stories they talk about more, the most, I bet. I guarantee you.
For sure. All right. One last question before we close it out. So,
Okay.
in your own words, how would you define being built for this?
I would say it's kind of the three things we've been covering. It's kind of going back to that. Like, being built for this is using your passion and your purpose to fuel what you're going through, what you want to do, and then having the bandwidth, the wherewithal to persevere through it and continue despite all those challenges. It's never going to be easy. If it's easy, it's probably a scam or it's worthless, right? So I think it's really accepting and understanding what your purpose and your passions are and
Yeah.
tapping into that and using that as the fuel to persevere through all the nonsense you're going to have to do. That's how you become built for this.
Love it.
That's how you fight through.
Amazing. Well, I wanted to thank you, Kyle, for coming on and sharing and being vulnerable with your story. And we're going to link to all TCG, ThoroMan, in the podcast so people can follow along. But for everybody listening, we're going to do a little promotion in honor of this connected brand and the meeting that they're up to. So we will post details soon, but listeners are going to have a chance to win a pair of TCG sneakers. And tell us a little bit about kind of the sneakers that you have sort of available online now. And if you want extra points to be able to kind of lock that spot in terms of being able to get it, your hands on a pair of these, what we would love to see from the maybe unknown thorough men out there.
Yeah. So, tcgfootwear.com. Right now we have kind of our three most popular shoes up there. Low tops that kind of go with, they call them versatile. They're casual athletic. We call it casualetic, right? Where they have an athletic feel, but a casual look where you can wear it with a suit, you can wear it with jeans, you can wear it to the club, you can wear it to a business meeting, whatever you need to do, right? You can just wear them going to the store. So they serve a lot of purposes. So we have those available for men going up to from sizes 8 to 13. And you just pick your favorite ones and we'll send those out to you. And then part of this promotion is if you, addition to tagging, following, linking and all the things that you're going to be, that you need to do, if you can share a story about when you had a vulnerable moment and you were able to or felt comfortable to seek help. Doesn't have to be professional help, but from a mentor, from a family member, from a person in your tribe or an actual therapist, and the results that you had from that help. I think if you could share that story, because we're trying to destigmatize, mental health, mental wellness for men. So if you guys can tell that story and share it and tag us, Thorough Vision and TCG Los Angeles on all social medias, that'd be great.
Amazing.
And
All right. So stay tuned for details. We're going to link that, but be sure to follow Built for This Story of a Maverick on all the channels that you listen to your podcast on. They're coming out soon. And we will be back around with our next guest soon. Thanks so much, Kyle.
Thanks for having me. That was great. I hope people get some benefit out of this for sure.
All right. Awesome.